You're watching Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. We are broadcasting from the All Asia Broadcasting Centre here in KL in Bukit Jalil. We want to focus a little bit more about the small and medium-sized digital financing platform funding societies. A few months ago, they announced that they raised about 18 million US dollars in debt finance, or about 80 million ringgit worth, led by a trio syndicate of financial institutions, including Singapore's Helicap Investments and the Social Impact Debt Fund. Helicap Investments is the investment arm of Singapore-based fintech startup Helicap as an alternative lending firm that provides private debt investments. The deal was arranged through the fintech's securities arm, Helicap Securities, which acted as the sole mandated lead arranger on the secured credit facility. Because of this, they have been growing strength to strength, and over here in Malaysia at Funding Societies Malaysia, the nation's first and largest digital financing platform, their mission is to empower a stronger nation by building stronger societies through stronger micro, small and medium enterprises, or MSMEs. We all know that the sector, MSME, forms 80 or 90% worth of employers, and of course they actually help the economy quite considerably, contributing to anywhere between 50 to 60 to 70% of the GDP. To understand this better, we have with us online with us Wong Kah Meng, the CEO of Funding Societies Malaysia, that perhaps can set the context perfectly because we want to understand a little bit more about how they plan to grow this a little bit better. Kah Meng, let's talk a little bit more about Funding Societies Malaysia. I think the last time we spoke was a few years ago. How have things been from the last time we spoke?
Hi, Ibrahim. Thanks a lot for having me on the show. Really great to be here, reconnecting again after 2 years. I think obviously the last 2 years have been a very interesting journey. I think especially for the financial services sector, different parts of the vertical being affected differently, whether you have payments, remittances, and or lending businesses. I think the last 2 years, especially challenging on the lending sector. But I think over time, what we have seen is being able to continuously serve the SMEs in Malaysia, and we've seen SMEs being very has been able to adapt quite well over the past years, despite the pandemic.
Yeah, we also understand that right now we're moving towards a recovery mode. Very recently, I had the first in-person conference at the Selangor ASEAN Business Conference. It was the first time stepping into the KL Convention Center. That gives back that mood that we're on the way back to normalcy. And of course, we'll never be able to eradicate COVID, at least not in the near term. We're now trying to live with it. But then includes that story of how the micro and SME is moving towards this recovery mode as well. So do you feel that we're in the notion that we're doing better these days, or do you feel that this sector needs as much help as it can possibly get right now?
I think there is no denying that the whole pandemic and shutdown in terms of the different economic sectors have been painful for a big part of the economy, whether you're SME or whether you're an individual. So I think there's no denying that. But to your point, we do see things shaping up quite positively. I think for us, where our hypothesis is that there has been a bit of a tale of two cities, whereby SMEs are no doubt the most impacted during the pandemic scenario. But we've also seen SMEs that were able to pivot and be creative with their business models, and hence continue to strive and thrive in this environment. So you see different SMEs being able to thrive in this environment. And in some cases, for those who continue to survive to this day, is actually benefiting from the additional demand out there from the consumer market. So I think overall, we do observe, and the hypothesis is of a tale of two cities scenario. And I think for us, during this period of time, we've been able to tap into that and to identify the SMEs that are very much credit-worthy and hence require and does deserve the financing that they need in order to thrive going forward.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, because what is important right now is there are business owners right now watching us having this conversation in this late night. They're also trying to understand how they can make themselves a little bit more creditworthy. What will be some of the ideas that you can share with us in terms of making a particular SME a little bit more attractive to creditors compared to other SMEs?
I think at the end of the day, I think entrepreneurs are a very resourceful and creative and innovative bunch. And I think it's just to maintain and keep that spirit, even in this COVID pandemic lockdown scenario. And I think it's about understanding your value chain of activities, understanding the customer demand, market shifts, identifying opportunities, and be able to sort of pivot or even reposition your business in order to be able to take advantage of that. As I was mentioning earlier, definitely there will be SMEs that fail that transition. And I think that's where SMEs are able to make the leap, continue to thrive.
We also talk a lot about getting fair access and driving economic equality, particularly among the underserved sectors. You have been speaking about this for quite a bit. Would you like to share more about this?
So I think some of the fundraising rounds that you mentioned earlier were, some of them are actually from impact-focused funds. And I think it's really around being able to support channeling of these funds to the micro and small enterprises that are most impacted during this COVID scenario. I think what we have, and where we started off the company was really we saw a gap in terms of the financial services industry of serving these SMEs, whether it's being underserved or unserved by traditional financial institutions, just because they are actually very heterogeneous, they're very different from one another, and they're nowhere as big as a corporation, and hence the margins that the traditional financial institutions make out of them may not be profitable for them to be bankable. So I think that's where we see that there's a gap in terms of markets being underserved or unserved, and I think that's where we come in, leveraging on a much more digital lean cost structure that's able to reach out and hence serve these underserved segments.
All right, there's still plenty more to unpack with Funding Societies of Malaysia, but for now we'll go for a quick break before we continue on our conversation with Wong Kah Meng.
Mak, okey.
Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga. Marilah bersama kita membina negara Malaysia.
Untuk memastikan Malaysia ada ke depan
dan maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada Islam. This is orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Asrama Mahat Tahfiz Jawaban.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa. Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga. Marilah bersama kita membina negara Malaysia.
Welcome back. I have on the line Wong Kah Meng, the CEO of Funding Societies Malaysia. Kah Meng, we want to explore a little bit better about what you said earlier before the break, which is trying to understand a little bit better about how to better serve the under of this sector, the MSME. Perhaps you can share with us a little bit more about the customer profiles that you have.
No, certainly happy to, Ibrahim. So we started off business, we launched in 2017 in Malaysia, and to date we have dispersed close to R1 billion in terms of financing to micro and small enterprises across thousands of loans. I think the majority of the customers that we support are within the micro and small SME size segments. So this would make up close to 95% of our total customer base. So it's micro, small, and to some extent medium-sized SMEs. I think the majority of them, when it comes to us, it's the first time they're actually getting the business financing to help grow and support their business. So I think we're really serving an untapped or unserved or underserved market in Malaysia. And I think the majority of them come from a large variety of economic sectors. So 60% of them would come from the wholesale and retail trade sector. And it's extremely diverse within that segment, anywhere from wholesale trading to retail trading across different kinds of goods, whether it's consumer durables and consumer perishables. Around 10% of them would be in manufacturing, another 10% would be in construction, and the remainders would be within the other service activities. I think this very much closely mimics the whole economic breakdown of the Malaysian economy, and hence it's extremely diverse in terms of the customer base that we serve. A big chunk of them, more than 50%, are actually very young companies, less than 5 years old. And I think that's where we see the SMEs, the micro SMEs, being underserved by the financial institutions.
It's also important for us to understand a little bit better about the locations of where these companies are. Are they mostly in big towns where perhaps greater economic activity is happening, or are they spread all across the country quite thin, irrespective of the population size, irrespective of the demography involved?
Around 70% of our customer base are still located in the main cities. But I think it's one of the key agenda and strategic goals for us to expand beyond just these major cities to East Coast and East Malaysia. And I think that's where some of the key partnerships that we've rolled out, even during the pandemic scenario, aims to achieving that goal. So, for example, partnerships that we have with Telecom, Yellow Pages, Panda, Lazada, and the likes are meant to help us to reach out to many more SMEs across the country and to be able to provide them access to financing.
We also want to understand a little bit better about the alignment that you guys have with the UN SDG that you mentioned earlier, which is not just to ensure that you are giving fair access and driving economic equality, but also ensuring that no MSME is left behind. Do you feel that the support of inclusiveness and sustainable economic growth equality is going to be addressed by a firm like yourself, or do you feel that there has to be some sort of concerted effort by everyone involved, including the government, including other private sectors, including other players, perhaps your competitors, to assist or grow this sector even further?
So I think the UN SDG has 17 key goals, and I think broadly where we focus our efforts more around is around income inequality by allowing everyone equal access to financing. I think the second agenda that we focus on is really around growth, economic growth overall. I think it's quite well documented in terms of how SMEs contribute to those key statistics, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, on job growth, in terms of economic growth, and so on and so forth. So I think that's where we come in. But I think even that is not enough. I do think that there is a lot of effort and sort of partnerships that need to happen in order for that to be successful. So I think specifically, we are working very closely with the regulators. We are working very closely, having conversations with government agencies, whereby we are able to reach out to and create more awareness amongst the micro SME sectors of how a digital financing platform such as ours can play a part.
What about market acceptance in terms of MSMEs trying to reach out to you guys or try to engage with you guys? Do you feel that this sector is already familiar with digitization, with the low-cost structure of digital solutions that you guys are providing, or there's going to be still some sort of curve that they need to overcome when it comes to getting financial support through digital means?
I think we have come a long way since we started 2017, whereby we were the first digital financing platform in Malaysia. We have come a long way since then, and we have done a lot of education, a lot of outreach, a lot of partnerships to put our names, put ourselves out there, creating more awareness and education. But I think there's still a lot more that needs to be done. I think especially for towards SMEs that are not in the major city areas, and then whereby if for a player like us, being a digital financing platform, we don't have a branch, right, for example, and we are nowhere as established as, say, a traditional bank. And hence, the whole trust element is still something that needs to be worked on. And I think that's where we focus a lot of our efforts in terms of reaching out to partners, because we believe that working with partners would be able to help us to bridge the trust gap at the beginning. And I think once an SME have actually gotten to know us, it's actually one of the key areas in terms of getting additional SMEs to learn about us. So I think the three things that the SMEs actually value when they come applying for financing with us is really around the speed at which we execute or we process the financing and getting the money into their bank accounts. I think secondly is in terms of the ease of application, being a digital-focused platform. And I think thirdly is in terms of the user experience, which leads on to the whole word-of-mouth referral sort of flywheel effect.
We will have to explore a little bit more, but now we go for a break. When we come back, we'll discuss a bit more with Funding Societies Malaysia.
When the world was changing for photographic film,
Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga. Marilah bersama kita membina negara Malaysia.
Untuk memastikan Malaysia ada ke depan
dan maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada
Islam.
orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Asrama Mahat Tahfiz AWANI.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa. Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga. Marilah bersama kita membina negara Malaysia.
Untuk memastikan Malaysia ada ke depan.
Kita boleh maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
CEO of Funding Societies Malaysia. Kah Meng, before we went to the break, you were talking at length about trying to build a better environment or ecosystem for you to assist the SMEs. There's also other possible new entrants into the market, albeit might not be addressing the SME sector, more individual. There's also that whole notion of Bank Negara going to be introducing digital banks sometime around the first quarter of next year. And of course, the liberalization of insurance players also coming into the market. All this is making the fintech sector a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more aggressive in terms of trying to bring the best out of each other for the service of the market. Do you feel that because of these new changes, these very interesting kind of developments, this is going to make your, life a little bit harder in trying to grow your own business? Or do you feel that this ecosystem is actually the thing that you need in order for you to grow the business even further?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Ibrahim. I think it's certainly with the new entrants, I think certainly it's a great step forward for the industry, and I think it at a very high level, it creates a lot more awareness, a lot more traction, and a lot more legitimacy towards the whole digital financing space. I think when we first started off, if you're a digital financing provider or you're a non-bank, generally speaking, it's a lot harder to gain the trust and also to build that relationship with your customers. And I think hence the whole pandemic and this industry development does push the whole industry forward in a positive way. I think at the macro level as well, if you look at the amount of financing that was dispersed, even though it's close to R1 billion since we started, the entire SME financing gap in Malaysia is estimated to be around R80 billion. So I think we are barely just scratching the surface in terms of being able to meet that or address that gap. I think having more players and having more different verticals within the digital financing space certainly helps to expand the pie. And I think what we have observed even for other markets, whether it's the banking sector or whether it's the digital financing sector, I think there's not there's not a winner takes all sort of industry. I think we do expect to have a number of major players at the end of the day in the financial services sector for the digital lending space, for example.
There's also that whole notion of what 2022 is going to look like, not just for funding societies, not just for the MSME sector, but generally for Malaysia as well. Are you rather optimistic on what is in store for us heading towards next year?
I think we are cautiously optimistic, going back to the whole notion of having a tale of two cities going on. And I think for us is that when we have continued lending to SMEs during these challenging periods, I think the default rates and the delinquencies have been a bit of a positive surprise, whereby it's actually a lot lower compared to some of the loans that we have given out before the crisis itself. And I think that goes to show in terms of how resilient the SME sector is. And I think that works quite well for all in terms of the whole digital lending landscape. I think generally speaking also the COVID scenario and the whole pandemic has sort of pushed forward or exacerbated the whole adoption of digital technologies. So a lot more SMEs are exploring digital platforms to run their business and by extension for financing services as well. And I think that bodes well for the overall economy.
Yeah, that conversation that I had with the managing partner of McKinsey Malaysia, he was talking about the item that precipitated the use or the adoption of digital is not, having a revolutionary CEO. It's not about having good governmental policies and all that. None of the above, or even good 5G or internet connection, is actually a pandemic. So, despite the bleak situation that we're in, it's also an ability for the market to actually catch up with the digital demands that can actually help their businesses, help their lives. Because of this, do you feel that this momentum is going to go on even after this pandemic ends and we enter into an endemic? Or do you feel that this momentum will actually slow down and people just tend to go back to the basics, tend to go back to how things were before the pandemic? What's your feel on this?
I think one of the biggest challenges when it came to digital adoption is really around the know-how and the willingness to explore those new digital technologies. And I think in this day and age, adopting those digital technologies it's not something that is too costly for a business to do. And I think the whole 2-year period has sort of forced SMEs to take a good look in terms of their existing business model and how they should really reposition or modify their business model, their operating models to be resilient. I'm pretty sure there might be future scenarios like this. It probably wouldn't be the last. And I think this is where I actually imagine some of the behaviors that has been driven out of the pandemic to continue lasting into the future.
My final question to you is this. Of course, being digital, you're very light in terms of CAPEX and OPEX. Do you feel that there's a time and space for you now to hire more, to actually boost up your capacity and strength to actually serve more customers? Or is it going to be more of trying to tighten the belt and see where things go from here on out?
I think the SME market is a very challenging market to be in, especially if you're in the digital lending space. I think there are SMEs that are very much, let's say, young entrepreneurs, millennials. They're very much accustomed towards using digital platforms, applying for financing, applying for anything online. But I think there's also a big segment out there that are probably less digital savvy. And I think that's where having sales force or a team that can actually speak to them, answer the questions, bringing them through the sales process actually really helps. And I think where we try to differentiate ourselves is really to, for these segments, to acquire them offline, right? But on an ongoing basis, be able to sort of then transition them towards an online self-service operating model. So I think in that frame, we do think that a hybrid approach between sales and as well as the digital delivery model actually makes a lot of sense.
All right, thank you, Kah Meng. I do wish your business all the best. 2022 is going to be an exciting year for all of us. But for now, we have to draw this conversation to a close. That was Wong Kah Meng, the CEO of Funding Societies Malaysia. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. You can also look for Funding Societies Malaysia. 2022 is upon us, and trying to understand how things work in the most important period of our recovery is going to be crucial. So continue on this conversation with us. Just tag me on all my social sites in order for me to continue to pick up some of the tone and voices that is needed from the public so that I can continue to ask these type of hard questions to our panelists on the show. Until then, that's all the things that we have for you in store for us today. But for now, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.